Hello everybody, and welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, we'll be doing my first preview of the 2024 Republican primary, but in, I guess, a different, less conventional way. So rather than make my prediction today, I'll be going through each state and saying who I expect to do better in a general election. So what this means is I'm talking about percentage of winner laws, not in terms of votes or margin, but just how well they would do compared to the Democratic nominee, likely Biden. So again, a lot of this is going to be very guesstimate type work because we don't have that many head-to-head polls with Trump and DeSantis at the state level. We do have federal polls that show generally DeSantis doing a bit better than Trump against Biden, but that's federal. And it's not necessarily an accurate indicator of each and every state because, as we know, not all states swing the same way in given elections. For example, just a quick reminder, in 2020, Colorado swung, I think, 8 points towards Biden, while Florida swung 4 points against him. So just between those two states, which are both kind of Sunbelt type states, 12-point difference in how they swung. We saw similar things in the Midwest. Donald Trump did very poorly in Michigan compared to how he did in 2016, doing about 3% worse. But in Ohio, he did, about the same. So again, states swing differently with different candidates in different environments. So I think it's important that we take a look at this, just analyze how these candidates would do in every state. So I think DeSantis is a better candidate than Trump in essentially all of New England. So we can kind of knock that out right now. He wouldn't do that well in New England. I don't think that he would get the margins that even Trump got in 2016. Because in 2016, Trump actually did quite well in New England. He came within 15 points of winning Connecticut and New Jersey. He did quite well in Delaware. He also fell below 16 in Rhode Island. So he had a pretty solid performance in New England, which I think is, quite interesting to me. But that was not replicated in 2020. Because in 2020, New England was one of the parts of the country that swung most to the left. He did, 6% worse in Connecticut, 5% worse in Rhode Island, 8% worse in Delaware. So, those trends I think continue to move against him. New England's a very educated part of the country that has a lot of liberal tendencies, and so I think that DeSantis would not do well there, but he would do slightly better than Trump. However, there is one part of New England I think Trump has the edge in, which would be the 2nd District of Maine, which is a rural working class right-running district. So if you go back to 2012, which was when Obama won his second term, he actually won this district by over 8%. It was not really that close. But in 2016, Trump won it by 10. So we saw an 18-point swing just in that district. It kind of stayed the same in 2020. He actually, I think, maybe won it by a couple points less, but it was essentially the same. And so I think both Trump and DeSantis would win it, but I think Trump wins it by a couple more just because, weirdly enough, in this one district, he is uniquely popular, right? Democrats actually hold the seat at the congressional level with Jared Golden. And, it's just one of those seats that seems to really prefer Trump. And I think that's pretty obvious at this point. New York, I'll put in the DeSantis call. I'll also go, put Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey there, as well as DC, although it's kind of marginal. New York is interesting because we saw Lee Zeldin come really close to winning that governorship last year. He came within 6 points of beating Kathy Hochul, which is very impressive. I know it was a red wave year in New York, but I think Zeldin kind of fueled that himself. He had a good message, and the state that Biden won by 23 points, meaning he did 18% better than Trump there. So New York, especially New York City itself, a lot of parts of it are trending towards Republicans. Doesn't mean it's going to flip anytime soon at the federal level, but I think DeSantis is just a better candidate for New York. He's more similar to Zeldin than he is to Trump, because Zeldin was not a moderate. He voted to overturn the 2020 election. He was very culture war-y, just like DeSantis. I think, whether or not you think DeSantis is more moderate than Trump is kind of your own thing, but he's certainly more of a Lee Zeldin type who could win New York. Now, that being said, I do want to get Appalachia out of the way, because I think that these states would be a bit more favorable to Trump. Obviously, DeSantis would win all these states decisively, but again, we saw pretty significant swings towards Trump in a lot of these states, like Kentucky. He won by 30, so he did about 8% better than Romney. He did a lot better than Romney. He won West Virginia by 16% more than Romney. He also won Tennessee by I think 10% more than, or by 5% more than Romney. So, these are states that have historically swung towards him, and I think DeSantis would do very well there. I think, this is kind of just Trump country, and I'd be, pretty confident to pick him to perform better in a general election there than DeSantis. Now, much to the contrary, I would put all these coastal southern states in DeSantis' column, as well as Florida, because Florida's DeSantis' home state. I think that's pretty obvious. But let's talk about, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. Especially in the case of Georgia and Virginia, these are once red states. Again, we know Biden, won Virginia by 10 and narrowly won Georgia. But just go back to 2004, which was the last time a Republican won the popular vote. Bush won Georgia by 16, and he won Virginia by 8. So that means we've seen an 18-point swing in Virginia since 2004 and a 17-point swing in Georgia since 2004. So again, that isn't to say that this was all Trump's fault. These trends were manifesting. Like Obama did 10% better in Georgia than Kerry, and in 2012 he stayed similar, although he did do a couple points worse than Hillary. Went back to the 2008 type margin, but these states are clearly more hostile to Trump than they are to other Republicans, right? Like Herschel Walker, who was the Trump candidate, was the only Republican to lose statewide in Georgia last year. Virginia, Glenn Youngkin won in 2021 by running literally a DeSantis type campaign. He was culture war oriented, talked a lot about wokeism in schools, and while that might not be an issue that'll play well in the Midwest, it has played well in states like Virginia. So DeSantis would not win Virginia. I am very confident in that, but he would do a couple points better in Virginia than Trump. I think he would lose it by single digits. Trump would probably lose it by upwards of 11 or 12. So those coastal states, which again are very suburban, these have a lot of red, educated suburbs, and especially a state like Virginia, which is like the only state of these four that I'd say is like truly a blue state at this point. DeSantis, I think, would make some inroads in the Northern Virginia area. Now, to Trump's credit, I think he gets a big state here, which is Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is, before I made the outline of this video, I had a debate with myself about it, because you could certainly say that DeSantis would do better than Trump in Pennsylvania as a result of just doing better in the Philadelphia suburbs. However, I think that we have to learn the lessons from the 2022 midterms, and the places that Oz did worse than Trump in, like he underperformed Trump in, I think, all but like one county, right? But the place he did worse than Trump in were the rural areas out west. Like, he did in some cases 8 to 10% worse than him in a lot of these smaller rural counties, hours away from Pittsburgh, than he did in the Philly suburbs. Now, he still underperformed Trump in the Philly suburbs, but only by, a point or so in a few of those counties, which is a pretty stark contrast from like the massive lags he had in performance in the western rural part of the state. And so what that means is that Republicans have more room. Like, obviously, like those suburbs are trending away from them no matter what. Like Oz ran a campaign for the suburbs and he got killed, right? He did not even outperform Trump. But it shows that there's like less variance there in a federal election than there is in the rural areas, because again, Oz had terrible turnout with rural voters in Pennsylvania, right? Like just awful. And that isn't to say Democrats didn't have their own problems. Like Fetterman had pretty bad turnout from Philadelphia, and all across the country, Democrats had pretty bad turnout in big cities, but Republicans struggle with turnout in many cases in rural areas, specifically in Pennsylvania. And so I think DeSantis himself would just not do well with those voters the same way Oz did not do well. So I think for that reason, I think both of them lose it, but I think Trump does maybe half a point to a point better. Ohio and Indiana, I think we just get, along with Iowa, we can just get the states out of the way. These are right trending states that Trump like solely delivered to the GOP, right? Like Ohio, Obama won it by 3. 2 years later or 4 years later, Trump wins it by 8. Iowa, Obama won by 6, which is a lot. Like Obama won Iowa by essentially the same amount that in 2020 Biden won New Hampshire, a bit less. But like that would be like, imagine if New Hampshire voted for Trump by like 9% in 2024. Like that would be crazy, right? That's the swing that happened in Iowa between 2012 and 2016. In Indiana, again, which Obama actually won 2008, he won it by about a point. Then in 2012, he lost it by over 10%. Trump won it by 19. So we saw 10% swings between 2008, 2012, and 2016. But either way, I think DeSantis is not the right guy for these regions. He'd win all these states for sure, but I do think Trump is better in Ohio, better in Indiana, better in Iowa, especially a state like Ohio, which has a lot of working class voters. And again, Trump-type candidates may fail in Ohio, and I think Trump himself would actually not do too much better in Ohio in 2024 than he did in 2020. But all things considered, DeSantis is just not the guy for these, for these states, and this is Trump country, like I said, for Appalachia. On the contrast, I think in the upper Midwest, we're in like the lower Midwest right now, I think DeSantis is better in the upper Midwest. And this might come as a surprise to some people who are like, well, DeSantis, he would underperform Trump with working class voters in Wisconsin and Michigan. And I think, that could be true to an extent. But again, Republicans ran DeSantis type candidates, especially Michigan with Tudor Dixon, who talked a lot about culture wars. And she flopped. Like, she lost by over 10? So Michigan is a different state from Ohio. Like, they share a border, but they are very different states. And so the working class populations in Michigan, I think, are just much more liberal in general than those in Ohio or Indiana. And again, that's not to say that, they're going to flock to Biden, but they are certainly, I think, less Trumpian. And, just because Trump won Michigan in 2016 with, again, like Trump won, I will stand by this. Trump won Michigan in 2016 because there was I think, a severe rainstorm in Detroit, which depressed Democratic turnout in the city on election day. That might be like why Trump won Michigan. It was very, very lucky. I don't want to call it a fluke because it did happen for a reason, but like it was very, very lucky, and we have not seen anything like it since then. Like Republicans have not even come close to winning Michigan since 2016, with the exception of the 2020 Senate race, which again was because John James was an exceptional candidate and because Gary Peters underperformed. But realistically, Michigan is a blue leading state as proven by these midterms. And so as a result of this, I think DeSantis, would underperform like in Michigan just in general because we saw Tudor Dixon flop with like the culture war type rhetoric. But again, Trump, his candidates did not play well. Like Tudor Dixon was a bad candidate, but she did better than Christina Caramo, and I believe better she did about the same as Matt DePerno, but she overperformed Christina Caramo, who was definitely the most Trumpy type Michigan statewide GOP candidate. And so as a result of that, I think it's pretty fair to say DeSantis would do a bit better than Trump in Michigan, but neither would win it. Wisconsin, this is like, I think, the toss-up state right now. Like, if I had to pick one state across the country that I really don't know how it's going to vote, it'd probably be Wisconsin. For that reason, I guess I'll give it to DeSantis. I think he has more potential in WOW than Trump does in the Driftless region. And so I think, like all things considered, it would be close between the two. And I could see the case for DeSantis doing better in Wisconsin, or for Trump doing better in Wisconsin, but the suburbs are just bigger. And that's why DeSantis would probably outperform. Now, let's just get some rural states out of the way because I don't want to go through each of these individually. I think, those are the wrong districts. I think Trump would do better in like a lot of these like rural, like right trending states. Just in general, I guess I'll give him the Deep South because they did flock to him in the primary in 2020 or 2016. But yeah, I mean, I think that these rural states and the second district or the third district of Nebraska are just big Trump country. Again, these states, like Democrats have no chance of winning any of these like red states that I just like selected. And so it's really just turnout, right? It's not like as much persuasion as it is turnout. And that benefits Trump because his base is just bigger than DeSantis's. And while DeSantis would probably do better with independent or moderate voters than Trump, Trump's base is bigger. And so I think the turnout in those states, because again, there's not a lot of moderate swing voters in any of these states, turnout would just give Trump the edge over DeSantis. Although again, does it matter because these states are going to vote Republican anyways? I don't really know. Now, let's just get these kind of states over here out of the way. I think DeSantis would particularly do better in Illinois as well as suburban Nebraska. This seat's kind of the exurbs. The seat's like more Omaha itself. Either way, these are more educated parts of Nebraska, and I think that they would, be meaningfully more Republican for DeSantis. Because again, like the second district of Nebraska, kind of like the reverse of second district of Maine. It's a seat that is trending blue. This one's trending red. It's a seat that voted for Biden. As he voted for Trump. But this seat has a Republican representative, while this seat has a Democratic representative. And so that means that there is a tendency in Nebraska's second district to vote Democrat federally, especially for Biden against Trump, but they're still open to voting for a House Republican. And so Don Bacon is not really, he's kind of moderate, but he's not really that moderate. He's more of a, kind of Glenn Youngkin type, if I had to say. So, he's a bit more moderate than Trump, but not really that moderate in general. And so that type of voter would probably flock to the DeSantis camp, I would say. Illinois, similar thing. DeSantis would maybe do a bit worse than Trump in the downstate part of the state. Jeez, I cannot talk today. But in the Chicago suburbs, it would be hard for me to imagine DeSantis, not doing better than Trump. These are down ballot Republican, white, fairly educated suburbs that have been trending towards Democrats in recent years, but I think would still, be more inclined to vote for DeSantis than Trump. So he'd do a little better there, and as a result, would do better in the state overall. Now, I think we'd see a similar thing in Kansas. Now, this looks a bit weird because, again, Kansas we think of as a rural state that's, surrounded by Trumpy states. But Kansas has actually been trending left because in 2012, when Obama did really well in the Midwest, he actually lost Kansas by 22. But then in 2016, Trump wins it by 20. So only about a 1-point swing towards Trump. But again, considering how the rest of the states bordering Kansas swung towards Trump, not good. But when you go over to 2020, it gets about 6% more Democratic. That isn't to say Kansas is competitive in 2024, but I do think that in a general election matchup, DeSantis would pretty clearly do better here than Trump. The state has a lot of ancestrally Republican suburbs in the Kansas City area, and those suburbs again wouldn't love DeSantis, but I think that they'd be more favorable to him than they would to Trump. And so for that reason, I think Kansas would probably vote for Trump by 10, but for DeSantis by 13 or 14. Texas, this is a state that I think DeSantis would just kill it in compared to Trump. I think Trump wins Texas by 3 or 4 in 2024 against Biden as of right now. DeSantis, I think, wins it by upwards of 6. And that's because of two things. First of all, Trump has a reputation for doing very well with Hispanics in the Rio Grande Valley, which he did do in 2020. But historically, incumbents have done really well with Hispanics for whatever reason. Even in 2012, where the country as a whole swung against, this map, this country as a whole swung against Obama, but he did better with Hispanic voters overall, which is why he was able to hold on to Florida. He was able to actually, I think, do a little better in Texas. Or no, he actually did worse in Texas, but he did better in the Rio Grande Valley. And so that maybe gives me a little bit of pause on saying that Trump would just do better, because Biden would probably be boosted by that, Hispanic incumbency effect. And then in addition to that, I think DeSantis, coming from a state like Florida, where he's actually done very well with Hispanics, as recently as last year, he'd just do better than Trump with Hispanic voters, which is Trump's strength, or was his strength in 2020. And as of right now, I think that DeSantis would beat him there in Texas. I think Trump would also do worse than DeSantis in, the Dallas suburbs, specifically Fort Worth, because those areas are very conservative, but they did swing towards Biden in 2020 because they were just very anti-Trump suburbs. I think, politics observers who have been looking at or who have been watching politics for years now will know Trump is just uniquely bad in the suburbs. They're trending against Republicans in general, but Trump is just uniquely horrible for them. So for that reason, I think DeSantis is better than Trump in Texas by, hundreds of thousands of votes, which is a lot to say the least. But either way, it's important that we move on to some more states. So I think New Mexico and Arizona, we can kind of say the same thing. Trump did well with Hispanics in these states in 2020, but I think DeSantis would do better. Plus, the suburbs would, give these states a pretty clear DeSantis-y lean. I think in all three of these states, they'd probably be 4 to 5% more favorable to DeSantis than they would to Trump in a general election. I think Utah, Idaho, and Montana are also pretty obvious. These are states that, Democrats have been doing a bit better in as of late, especially Utah, where the independent candidate, Evan McMullen, actually came within 11 points of beating Mike Lee, which was pretty shocking because that's 11 points in Utah is really close. Because again, a lot of people don't remember how red Utah was, but even 2008 when or even 2012 when Obama ran against Romney and won pretty decisively nationwide, he lost Utah by 50 points or 48 points. In 2020, Biden lost Utah by 20. So it trended 28% towards Joe Biden, and then McMullen loses it by 11. So over that 10-year span, there's been almost a 30-point swing against Republicans in Utah. And so that's, I think, a lot in part to Trump. But in addition to that, Utah likes establishmentarian conservatives as well as Idaho. But I think Utah is the best example of this in the country. And so for that reason, you will see, Donald Trump doing just 10% worse than Romney, and if we were able to compare, right? So I think Utah will be one of the states that's most pro. Did I say Romney? Pro DeSantis, not Romney, relative to Trump. Idaho and Montana to a lesser extent, but again, these states both swung against Trump because in 2016, again, Trump won Idaho by 32. He won Montana by 20.5. He won Idaho by 30. So I guess Idaho he did basically the same, but Montana did swing against him by around 5%. So, yeah. I think we can be done with kind of the Mountain West region. Colorado's similar. It's trending blue, but DeSantis would just do slightly better in the Denver suburbs, the same way Joe did. He got killed, but he did a bit better than Heidi Gaynell, who ran against Jared Polis. So I think you can put Colorado in the DeSantis column as well. And so that leaves just 6 states here. And I think the first one I'll do is pretty obvious. I think Nevada is a pro-DeSantis state. It elected Joe Lombardo, who is, I wouldn't call him moderate, but he's definitely less Trumpy of a Republican, especially compared to Adam Laxalt, who lost the Senate race on the same, ballot. And so I think Nevada right now is interesting in that I don't really know who'd be favored in it because like the Nevada Democratic Party just kind of had like a pretty chaotic month where they replaced their party chair after, it was revealed by, a lot of important people that she was not really helping out Democrats win statewide. And so because of that, I will say that, Nevada is getting better and better for Republicans just because like the dysfunction that has been plaguing the NVDP for the past couple of months. But again, we still have a year to go to the 2024 election, so that might not be a thing by then. But either way, Trump, I think, would do worse in the state than DeSantis. I think he'd underperform severely in the Las Vegas. Because again, Sunbelt, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Austin, Dallas, even, Miami to an extent, but not as much. Just like, these 3 states, Nevada, Arizona, Texas, right? These swing states, these states that have a ton of suburbs that are trending towards Democrats. These are like, this is ground zero for DeSantis to do better than Trump. Like, he'd probably do better than Trump in, like, take, like, the Philly suburbs. He'd do better than Trump by a little bit there, but like, he'd do a lot better than Trump in Phoenix, Las Vegas, Austin, Dallas, right? And that's because he's a Sunbelt governor who has unique appeal to these, states in a way he doesn't to the Midwest or to the Northeast. And so Nevada and the Vegas suburbs would be, swinging towards DeSantis. He might do a little worse in the rural areas, but he'd make up for that in, both Las Vegas as well as in Washoe County, which is kind of the swing county of Nevada. And moving up to Washington and Oregon, I think these states would be similar. I don't really think DeSantis is a good fit for these states in general. These are liberal states that have been trending towards Democrats, and I think Biden would win both of them comfortably. But DeSantis at the same time is just slightly better for the suburbs than Trump. And I think, the suburbs in these states make up a higher percentage of the electorate than rural areas. So call these states DeSantis states, I guess. California is also a DeSantis state. We saw that Republicans did quite well in California last year. They were able to make a lot of inroads in the suburbs. Again, that was a local election, obviously, in the governorship. But, it's proof that Republicans do still have paths to, like, not lose by 30 in California. Though I think DeSantis will do a little better than Trump in California because he'd do better in the San Diego and Los Angeles suburbs, which, again, people forget. Like, people assume that, San Diego and LA are just a deep blue. These suburbs actually did elect, especially in Los Angeles, they elected a few Republicans to Congress, and, they're getting bluer, but these are areas that I think Republicans do have potential in, especially someone not like Donald Trump. Because, again, Donald Trump lost Young Kim and Michelle Steele seats, and Michelle Steele was elected to Congress by 4. Young Kim was elected to Congress by, like, I think 15 or something ridiculous like that. And so that just shows Republicans not named Trump can do, like, double digits better than Trump in those SoCal suburbs. And for that reason, I think it's pretty reasonable to expect DeSantis to do a little better in California, even if it's not by a ton. Now, Alaska and Hawaii, I think these are pretty similar states. Although, just for fun, I guess we'll split them up. I think Hawaii will give to Trump just to be interesting here, because Hawaii is a state that has actually been a bit, more right trending as of late. That's not to say that I think it's going to flip anytime soon, but Asian American voters in the state, which do make up a big portion of the electorate, by the way, have been swinging towards Trump. In 2004, actually, a lot of people don't know this. In 2004, Bush actually only lost to Hawaii by about 9%, which is pretty impressive considering the fact that in 2008, just 4 years later, Obama won it by 45. So, he did 37% better than Kerry, which is insane to think about. But either way, Hawaii is a more right-trending state. A lot of Asian voters there seem to prefer Trump, and I think for that reason, I guess we give it to Trump, although I'm not really sure about that one. Alaska, on the other hand, is more like a Utah state, more libertarian, more conservative, especially socially. And so for that reason, I think it's pretty fair to estimate that the state would swing back towards DeSantis. Not to say that it's definitely a left-running state, but I think DeSantis would do a lot better in Anchorage with business, kind of business-type GOP voters. And for that reason, I think Alaska, DeSantis state. So that wraps up this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Comment down what you think. Do you think there's any states that I, missed on? Tell me, and we'll see. So thank you so much, and I'll see you all in the next video.